An ionic bond is a type of chemical bond between a metal and a nonmetal. The metal transfers its valence electrons to the nonmetal because its electronegativity is more attractive. The ions are then held together by electrostatic force. These oppositely charged ions arrange themselves into a 3D structure called a crystal lattice. An ionic compound is composed of ions. The empirical formula of an ionic compound indicates the smallest whole number ratio of each type of ion in the crystal lattice. When solutions of two ionic compounds are combined, the ions rearrange themselves to form a new ionic compound that's insoluble, meaning the solid is unable to dissolve in water. The solid is called the precipitate. Ionic compounds can be prepared by using precipitation reactions.
To perform the lab, we use 7 test tubes on a test rack, 2 solutions, NO3PO4 and CuCl2, a pipette, a data table from the lab worksheet, and a stirring rod. Each test tube was numbered 1 through 7 and placed in a test tube rack. The pipette was filled with copper-2 chloride solution, and based on the specifications on the data table, a certain amount of drops were put into each test tube. The pipette was then filled with the second solution, sodium phosphate, and based on the specifications on the same data table, a certain amount of drops were put into the same test tubes. A stirring rod was then used to mix the solutions in each test tube. After 10 minutes, we recorded the results on our data sheet.
After completing the lab, we came across various precipitation heights in each of the 7 test tubes. Test tubes numbers 1 and 9, containing volume ratios of 1 to 9 and 9 to 1, of the solutions copper-2 chloride and sodium phosphate, had the lowest amount of precipitate formed, which was 5 millimeters. Test tube number 2, with the ratio of 1 to 4, formed only 8 millimeters of precipitate, while test tube number 6, containing the reciprocal ratio of 4 to 1, formed about 10 millimeters of precipitate. Test tubes 3 and 4 had relatively high precipitation numbers, recorded at 15 millimeters and 18 millimeters, but did not have the highest precipitation number. We concluded that test tube number 5, having a volume ratio of 3 to 2, had the highest amount of precipitate, 25 millimeters, after sitting for 10 minutes undisturbed. From observing the information, we found the formula of the products of the combination of the two solutions to be Cu3 parentheses PO42 plus NaCl, Cu3 parentheses PO42 being the insoluble precipitate and NaCl being the soluble part of the solution.
After analyzing the recorded data, we concluded that test tube 5 had the highest height of precipitation with a ratio of 3 to 2. The empirical formula for the product is copper-3 phosphate-4, which has the same ratio as test tube 5, both in simplest form. Copper and phosphate were combined with their ions rearranging, forming a new ionic compound that is solid, unable to dissolve, making it insoluble. These two ionic compounds, positive and negative ions, dissolved in free-moving ions, creating an electrolyte. Each ion had a 3 to 2 ratio in copper phosphate's crystal lattice. All this information can be found in the article Chemical Reactions Precipitation by De Leon.